What's up guys, Kazungu here and welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. Today I'm going to be talking about the fusion rifles inside of Season of the Lost and looking at a few different combinations of fusions or linear fusion rifles that you could use for bosses in the current season. I'm going to be breaking down the numbers as well as giving my opinions as to which fusion rifles are best for bosses right now inside of Destiny 2. Before we begin, however, I would like to say thank you all so much for helping me pass 200 subscribers, and if you liked the video or found it helpful, a like is always greatly appreciated, and feel free to subscribe as well if you want some more Destiny videos. Also, when this video goes live, I'll be streaming over on my Twitch channel for a few hours, so feel free to come check me out over there. I left the link in the description, and let's get on to the video. It's no secret that fusion rifles in Season of the Lost are our new boss damage meta, specifically due to the new artifact mod, Particle Deconstruction. This mod makes successive hits with fusion rifles cause fusion rifles to do more damage to that specific target. It does currently appear to stack with other debuffs, but only with the Hunter Shadow Shot, and only if the Shadow Shot is applied after Particle Deconstruction. As a result, I'm not very sure if this is a bug or if it's intentional. Bungie hasn't really addressed it yet, but as of the time of writing this video, that's how the debuff stacking for this works, so just make sure you bring a Hunter with Shadow Shot, you should be fine to get your maximum damage on debuffs. I did also decide to break down what combination of energy fusion and heavy fusion would result in the most damage to bosses. I took all of the values you're going to see coming up from fighting the Lost Sector boss on Nessus, and I calculated damage with Particle Deconstruction active, and I did take reload and charge time values into account for DPS. For the heavies, I go based on one reserve total output, since they tend to take a very different amount of time to put out their total reserves. I will explain why each one is good for a different thing later, but I will say that for energy fusions, higher DPS tends to equate to higher total damage as well, whereas for heavies that is by no means the case since we have a lot of exotics, so that's why I'll be talking about DPS or damage per second specifically for the energy fusions and total damage output across one reserve for the heavies, just to clear up any confusion. But let's start with the energy slot. Looking at the new fusion rifle from this season, Iota Draconis, which is dropping from Umbral engrams currently, with high impact reserves and 100 impact from our battery options, we get a total damage per second of 36,205. Not bad, but what can its competition do? Quick disclaimer here before I go into any more fusions, Plug 1, which I thought might be good competition for it, at least in my testing, fell so far short that I won't even waste your time with the numbers. If you want an adaptive frame, try a Dreambreaker with Surrounded. I, however, do not have one, so that's why it doesn't appear in the testing. It's probably pretty close to a high impact, but not quite as good as your rapid fires. That, in fact, brings us to rapid fire frames, which now actually fire 9 shots per burst, a big part of why they do so much damage. Null Composure with high impact reserves is going to be the one that most people will default to, but I will say that technically speaking, Zealot's Reward, dropping from the first encounter of Garden of Salvation, is better, since it can get high impact reserves and actually auto-loading holster in the third slot, while also enjoying pretty much the same damage potential as Null Composure. Null Composure, however, is much easier for most players to obtain, simply because there's no RNG involved with the weapon, and as such, just about everybody has got it at this point. Null Composure had a 1 mag damage per second of about 57,420 with Particle Deconstruction factored in. This is much better than Iota Draconis, so Zealot's Reward and Null Composure are definitely the best legendary energy fusions for boss DPS this season. But if we look at exotic energy fusions, the two I would like to highlight are Merciless and Jotunn. Starting with Merciless, every time we actually increase our charge rate on the exotic perk, our damage gets lower, but this season saw a change to how much that damage is reduced by. That was a big buff for Merciless. But does this buff make Merciless a top tier fusion for DPS like it was during D2 Vanilla? Well, if we account for the speedier charge time and reload, and factoring in Particle Deconstruction's buff, Merciless is able to get a DPS value of 45,850, which is still lower than Null Composure, and as a result, I don't think it's worth using the exotic slot on Merciless. Jotunn, on the other hand, may provide a little more practical usability, given that it has tracking and very long range. Jotunn, with Particle Deconstruction factored in, as well as the burn damage from its exotic perk leaving the flames after the impact, can do 42,106 DPS to bosses. Not bad for something at long range, but we also have to take heavies into account, so it'll depend on whether other heavies can stack up to Jotunn. I don't really think it can, given that all the heavies do much more damage and are also relatively long range, especially with things like Sleeper or 1K. Speaking of 1k, this gun can now hit a 1 reserve total damage of 883,155. This is lower than some of the other stuff I'm going to be going over coming up, but 1k is actually able to get this much damage out way faster than any of the other weapons I'm mentioning, so its actual burst damage is going to be much higher than other options listed here, and as a result, even though its damage is much lower, it's still very, very good, especially given the fact that 1000 Voices does not need crits to reach its maximum damage potential. So for bosses that aren't easy to crit, 1000 Voices is 100% going to be your go-to weapon. If we were to compare this to Sleeper, the other hot heavy fusion rifle right now, we see that Sleeper has a 1 reserve total of 1,192,056, which is also really good given that this is only 13 shots, and as shown by my previous video regarding Sleeper, Sleeper Simulant actually does really good damage even if you miss a few crits, since its body shots hit for 72% of its crit damage. I also tested Queenbreaker, of all things, since it can actually carry more ammo than Sleeper, resulting in a total 1 reserve damage of 1,284,329 with Particle Deconstructor. This will take a lot longer to achieve than Sleeper's damage will though, so only use this for much longer damage phases. Yes, Queenbreaker has more total damage than Sleeper, but not by much, and Sleeper gets all of its damage out much faster. So as a result, I still have to say that Sleeper is better for general use outside of bosses that have very, very extended damage phases. If you do happen to have a God-rolled Threaded Needle with something like auto-loading Vorpal, rapid hit Vorpal, something like that, you'll actually be able to do a total of 1,347,710 damage with Particle Deconstruction. And if we were to take the new Trials Linear Fusion Rifle, Reed's Regret, into account, its triple tap Vorpal roll should in theory do even more total damage. But it hasn't been available yet, seeing as Trials does not actually return until September 10th, although we do know its perks and stats due to them being available in the database, which is why I mentioned that it should in theory be even more total damage than the Threaded Needle. So what's the best combined setup of these weapons for total overall damage? Well, for your energy slot, I think the clear winner is actually going to be either Null Composure or Zealot's Reward with high impact reserves. And then for your heavy slot, I do think there are some options. For bosses where you have very short damage windows, or it will be extremely difficult for you to land your crits, I would say that you should 100% go with 1000 Voices, since it will actually do a lot of damage in only a very short amount of time, and it is not at all reliant on crits to do full damage. For bosses where you can reasonably land some crits but don't have tons of time to do so, Sleeper paired with Null Composure will definitely be your best choice, since Sleeper can hit for over 100k per shot per crit on some bosses when you account for things like Well of Radiance or Weapons of Light, which were not taken into account for this video's numbers. For bosses with long damage phases and very easy crits, I'd say that you should use either Threaded Needle or Reed's Regret with your energy fusion to hit hard. This will also leave your exotic slot open, so you'd have a few options for that kinetic slot that are left over. However, all of these fusions are fairly easy to make good use of, so just make sure you have a wide variety of things so you have at least 1 or 2 things that fall into each of these categories that I've laid out. But what's the takeaway here? Well, I would say that it's that rapid fire fusions are pretty busted, and you've got a lot of options in the heavy slot depending on what it is that you're trying to do in terms of a boss fight. Also, feel free to experiment a bit. The mathematically optimal setup isn't always the best in practice, but I make these math videos to help set people that may have questions about DPS potential of some weapons in the right direction. It's not necessarily me trying to say that you should use this because it has the most damage in theory, it's me giving you the theoretical damage of things so that you can try and apply them in practice. Not everything that does the most optimal damage will always work out in the end. However, that's all I have for today's video, so again, if you liked it or found it helpful, a thumbs up is greatly appreciated, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see some more Destiny videos. Like I mentioned at the start, I'm going to be streaming on Twitch when this video goes live, so feel free to check me out over there. I've linked my stream in the description, and as always, thank you so much for stopping by, and have a fantastic day.